This is David Harvey, and you're listening to the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles, a podcast that looks at capitalism through a Marxist lens. This podcast is made possible by Democracy at Work. So, welcome to Season 5 of the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles. Now, before I begin, I want to acknowledge that Democracy at Work is now celebrating 10 years of producing critical system analysis and visions of a more equitable and democratic world. In a situation where much of the social media is dominated by right-wing chatter, it's terribly important that we have systems like Democracy at Work to counter all of that stuff. If you like Anti-Capitalist Chronicles, I recommend that you check out Democracy at Work's other shows, podcasts, and books, including Cities After with my good friend and colleague, Miguel Robles-Duran, who works a great deal on cities and how to understand urbanization. And he and I have done a lot of work together and enjoy very much. I enjoy very much what he has to say, and I'm sure you will too. We want to thank our growing audience that makes this show possible. Whether you're a financial supporter or share our work with others, we want to thank you for partnering with us. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you to the monthly supporters who make this show possible. And I want to make a plea: help support our work, please. Subscribe to Democracy at Work on YouTube and help us reach our new goal of 300,000 subscribers. Subscribing not only helps keep us in your feed, it also helps boost the visibility of our channel. Be sure to click on the red subscribe. If you like these videos, you can keep with us on social media and on Patreon. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you tune in again next time. So I wanted to recapitulate the central themes that I have been articulating in these Anti-Capitalist Chronicles. To be anti-capitalist means to be anti-capital and to therefore understand what capital is. And Marx defines capital as value in motion. And so I want to talk today about, give you a visual example of what Marx is talking about, of value in motion and a theory of capital as a totality. In other words, I want to talk to you about how to picture the capitalist mode of production and the capitalist social formation. And to do that, I'm going to spend some time examining a diagram which I've constructed and which was, in fact, designed by my good friend Miguel Robles-Duran. And the picture is one in which we actually think about the circulation process of capital and how it circulates and therefore how we should understand various facets of what is going on around us in terms of these circulatory processes. In so doing, I'd like to suggest that the analogy which I will make use of here is that of the human body. We can take a picture of a human being and say, well, okay, that is the totality we wish to look at. So we look at the human body as a sort of medical kind of construct. And while every body is different, we can actually set up what Marx would call a concrete abstraction. That is an abstraction, a general picture of what all human bodies are about. And when we start to do that, we will see straight away that the human body contains a variety of circulatory processes, all of which are interacting with each other, and all of which are also at the same time possible to identify and examine as a particular, as an entity, as it were. For example, the heart circulates blood, and so the circulation of the blood around in the body is one circulation process, which, of course, calls forth a large number of specialists like cardiologists and so on, who can specialize and tell us very much about this circulatory process. The lungs, on the other hand, are actually taking in oxygen and bringing oxygen into the body. And there are specialists there, pulmonary specialists, who will look at, again, the circulation of oxygen through the lungs. We eat food, we ingest food, so the gastroenterologists come along and tell us about how the stomach works and all the rest of it. We have to deal with waste, so we get the liver and the kidney systems and so on. We also need to think about how this is all coordinated neurologically, so we get neurological specialists. So what we would end up with is that the concrete abstraction of the human body can be broken down into these particular parts, and we will have neurologists telling us about this part, pulmonary specialists telling us about that part, a cardiologist telling us about another part. And so the analysis here then would say what Marx is doing is talking about capital in a similar kind of vein. The totality of the formation of capital is made up of different circulatory processes which are very similar. And of course, what I'm going to do then is to look at those circulatory processes and to suggest the kinds of specialisms that come up even in Marxist analysis, in the same way that you get cardiologists and pulmonary specialists and gastroenterologists and all the rest of it. So within Marxism, you get experts on finance, capital, experts on labor processes, experts on cultural structures of consumption, and so on and so forth. But in doing this, we also have to recognize that the human body does not exist in total isolation from an environment. And that therefore, if we want to talk about the health of the human body, we might take a very different perspective and say, what is the general state of healthiness of bodies in the state of Ohio, for example, where there's been a lot of unemployment, opioid epidemics, problems of alcoholism, and all kinds of problems of this kind. And in this case, the human body is abstracted as a totality, but it has a certain environment which is relevant to it. And therefore, we have to think about the body in its environment. And the same thing is going to apply to capital. We have to think about capital in its environment. Now, Marx has two concepts he puts forward in this. And the concepts are that of capital's mode of production, which is, if you like, the parallel to the body. It's the body, if you like, of capital circulation. And then there is something called the capitalist social formation, which is the environment in which this takes place. And I'll illustrate that a little bit further on. Now, what I have done is to try to put these ideas together and to end up with a picture of what the capitalist mode of production looks like in terms of the circulatory process, which is capital as value in motion. And to this, I need to switch to examine a particular the diagram I have here, which is a diagram of what really matters. So this is the diagram that I've come up with, and the best way to understand it is to just imagine a situation of the following sort: that somebody comes along in a society where there is a lot of money already circulating and decides to use money in a certain way to make more money. And that person is going to be the capitalist. And this starts off here in this diagram with money capital. So some money is laid aside and starts to operate as capital. And the way it operates is the capitalist takes the money and takes it into the marketplace and buys means of consumption, or buys commodities. And those commodities are of two types. One is labor power, and the other is means of production. So the value of the money is now represented by the value of these commodities. And these commodities are now taken into a production process, which is this large red area here, production process in which labor is combined with means of production to make a new commodity and to create value in a different sort, so that we have value in monetary form, money in commodity form, money in productive activity form. And coming out of that productive activity is another commodity. and the commodity is then has a value, because the value which was down here in money has been transferred, and it's coming out now in the form of commodities. And the commodities are of various different types. One is wage goods, that is the kinds of things needed to keep workers alive. Then some of the luxuries for the bourgeoisie, and some are producing means of production for other capitalists. So we have a loop back here of means of production coming back in this way. These are then taken into the market and sold. So that the value is now represented by the money which is received by selling of the commodities. So again, what we see is that the value takes different forms going through these different conditions. Here it has commodities, down here it was as commodities, here it is productive activity, and it is here then converted into money. And that money is then distributed amongst various claimants who are going to claim a certain amount of what that money is representing. And some of it goes in wages, some of it goes in taxes to the state, some of it goes in as industrial profit, some of it goes as merchant profit, some of it goes as rent to the landlords, some of it goes as interest to the money capitalists. So the money then is distributed amongst these various forms. Now, what those the people there do with it can be divided into two things. Some of it will go into consumption. So we have a link up here in which we have bourgeois consumption, we have state consumption, and we have workers' consumption coming back in, forming effective demand for product this way. So there's a loop there. And the rest of it goes into reinvestment. So it comes around here and comes back to money capital. At the same time, some of it will be sort of located in the banks and converted by the banks into interest-bearing capital, which also comes back here. So Marx's argument is that if we want to understand capital accumulation, we have to understand this as a process. And it's a process where value takes different forms. As I've said, it's commodities at one point, productive activity another, money at another point, and it is doing the work of circulation of this kind. So this forms what Marx calls the inner structure of capitalism, the inner structure, which he calls the capitalist mode of production. And it's this mode of production that he's fundamentally analyzing in the 3 volumes of Capital and also in texts like the Grundrisse. So this is the center, if you like, of what the capitalist mode of production is about. But this capitalist mode of production, like the human body, when it's put into a kind of Ohio or wherever, finds itself in certain kind of environmental conditions. So this inner structure is operating in a context, and this context is contained in these two things. First, there is the context of the natural environment, of nature, the metabolic relation to nature, the creation of an alternative nature down there, what Marx calls second nature, by investment in the built environment, the creation of urbanization, the building of places and that. And so here you have a sort of vast set of activities which are surrounding the mode of production. And this is what the social formation of capital is all about. And the same thing applies up here, where we have also what might be called the possibilities, cultural possibilities, cultural history, and cultural forms, and so on, which are again going to be partly drawn upon as capital operates. So what we have then is the mode of production, which is this inner circulation process, and the social formation, which is this totality. So we have a totality within a totality, as it is, as it were. Now, this way of looking at things is, I think, critical, because one of the things that we find is that the human context and the traditions of working people and so on are terribly important as an environmental condition, so that the capitalist does not go and find any kind of labor They find a particular kind of labor force, which is already there, which has grown up historically, and which over time, of course, gets trained according to capitalist prerequisites. And so the labor supply, which comes from down here as commodities of wage labor and so on, that supply is some sort of interaction between the context and we have out here something which we call social reproduction. Now, the social reproduction aspect of all of this is terribly critical because not only does that draw upon the whole history of culture and patriarchy and all of the kinds of differentiations that exist in human populations, but social reproduction is also about the reproduction of a labor supply which is adequate to capital. In other words, you need to invest in some sort of schooling and education and all the rest of it in order to have a labor force which is going to be appropriate for the kind of technologies which capitalists are going to use. So social reproduction is important in that vein as if you like, feeding into the capitalist mode of production in critical kinds of ways. It also feeds into it in terms of wants, needs, and desires, which are there and have a very important role to play in the formation of consumer demand, that people want certain goods and commodities and need certain wants and commodities, and a lot of that cultivation of consumption habits occurs in the labor process and occurs in social reproduction. So social reproduction is a terribly important aspect of this, and it's if you like a sort of halfway in the capitalist mode of production, halfway in the social formation. So it's a sort of hybrid kind of positionality in relationship to these two concepts of mode of production, social formation. The same is also going to be true over here, and I haven't portrayed it properly, which is about the state. The state, of course, plays a very, very crucial role in supporting capital accumulation. The growth of the capitalist state from the sort of 15th century onwards was a crucial aspect of the growth of a capitalist society. So in the same way that social reproduction is partly inside and partly outside, so the state is partly inside and partly outside of this distinction I'm making between a capitalist mode of production and the capitalist social formation. Now, the capitalist social formation is something which is extremely varied, variations of environmental conditions, of social conditions, human history, and all the rest of it. So that if you try to insert capitalist production techniques into, populations in say indigenous populations in Latin America or in Africa, obviously this is a mismatch and it becomes hard to work out. So this becomes then a very complex system. But nevertheless, what Marx does and what I think we should do is to learn to sort of partition it and say, well, okay, I'm going to look at this inner structure. I'm going to look at the capitalist mode of production and all that it contains and all that's going on. And I'm going to use that as, if you like, in the same way that doctors would look at a body and kind of say, well, okay, there's a problem here or a problem there. So I'll see that there are certain problems which arise within this capitalist mode of production. And therefore, it's very important to understand how crises can erupt within a capitalist mode of production, where crises come from, and what kind of evolutionary strategy is going on here. Now, the other thing that is crucial to understand about this is that this is an expanding system. It's an organic system which is self-expanding. And it's expanding because comes a moment where you're converting what began as money capital down here comes out as receiving the monetary form up here. And you look at it and you say, why would somebody start with a certain amount of money in order to end up with the same amount of money? Why go through all of this to make to just end up with the same thing? what in fact happens is that you start to find that this system only works if the incentive is there to get more money, i.e., and this is what Marx calls surplus value at the point of realization of this process. So what you're looking at then is a circulatory process, which is expanding because of the profit requirement, and that surplus value and profit are going to be vital to create here. Now, one of the things he would say about this, and I think this is terribly important, there's a tendency within Marxism to say everything really rests on the question of production. That is, the central part here is the creation of surplus value in production. I think that is a very important role, but on the other hand, surplus value produced in production means nothing unless it also all these other features are engaged. And the analogy of the human body is, I think, here again useful and instructive. It's useful and instructive because you don't go around saying, "Oh, well, the heart is more important than the liver, or the heart is more important than the stomach, or the heart is more important than the brain." And if there is an illness in the body, there's only one real cause of death, which is the fact that the heart stops beating. Well, death is about the heart stopping beating, but the reason the heart stops beating is because there wasn't enough oxygen there, or there wasn't enough, the liver failed, or the neurological capacities dissipated, or something of that kind. So when you're looking at the human body, you tend to look at the different circulatory processes and to say that all of them are important. All of them, if they fail, are going to create a serious problem, a medical problem, and possibly resulting in death. And the same thing applies to all of these moments, as Marx calls them, in this circulatory process. That yes, surplus value is created in production, but on the other hand, it only exists if you can sufficiently go through all of the other moments, as Marx calls them, in this circulatory process. So this is the picture that you have of the circulatory process, and it's a very useful one, I think, to analyze, because when you hit a crisis, say like the crisis of 2007, 2008, one of the things you would do is to say, well, where within this system did this crisis really originate? Where did it come from? How did it spiral out of control and do the damage that it did? And so what we then find is that we need, if we want to have a proper crisis theory, we have to look at all of the possible points of failure within this, because if any one of these breaks down, if distribution breaks down, and everybody starts to find that all the distribution goes just to the very, very, very ultra rich, and there's nothing left for anybody else, well, there's going to be a monumental failure in the whole system, because there will be no supply. No demand coming from wages. Wages will be reduced in certain kinds of ways. And what we find is there are contradictions implied within this whole kind of system. This one is an obvious one, that yes, you want wages to be low when you're down here, because you want to be able to buy labor power as cheaply as you possibly can, which means you're going to pay it as little as possible in terms of wages. If you pay very little in terms of wages, then the worker consumer demand is going to become deficient, and you're going to find there's not enough effective demand up here to absorb the product. And so by actually reducing wages, which is a positive thing for capitalists here, but not introduce. The effect is to create a crisis of effective demand, which led, of course, people like Keynes and so on to say, well, one of the things you do in a crisis is you don't diminish wages, you increase wages, because if the problem of the crisis is lack of effective demand, you want to increase the effective demand, and one of the ways in which you will do that is to increase wages. It may also be possible to increase investment in fixed capital and all the rest of it, which also will come around here, so that industrial a high level of industrial profit will lead to lots of investment in new machinery and all the rest of it, which was going to produce effective demand again, which comes back in this kind of way. So you can see here that there are contradictory moments in this whole kind of thing. Well, a situation here where wages should be low, but the lower the wages are there, the less effective demand there is, and more of crisis depend issues come up around here. So, in a sense, one of the things I always end up doing is whenever I'm faced with a particular kinds of difficulty in an economy, and so all the figures start to go haywire, and the stock exchange collapses, and all kinds of things of that happen. You have a 1930s style crisis. I kind of say, okay, let's look at this whole kind of system, and let's see how capital deals with these contradictions, if it does, and how, if so frequently it does, in such a way that it exacerbates the contradictions and ends up sort of completing its crisis. So this is, if you like, the basic system that I always want to work with. Now, like any kind of picture of the human body, this is a very schematic thing, and there are many things that need to be added in here. For example, I've already mentioned the fact of the state and the use of taxation and state expenditures being embedded in here. So I know that is something where public policy has a very important role to play, and we can take a number of examples of this kind of process. So the reason I come back to this all of the time is to ask the kind of question, where are the weaknesses in the system? Where are the contradictions in this system? And how do the contradictions work? And under what circumstances can this system work in such a way as to be operating very smoothly? Can it be operating smoothly forever? The answer, I think, is no. There are certain kinds of circulatory processes that start to become very much more significant. For instance, the circulation of interest-bearing capital down here starts to become very significant, creating the significance of financialization and all of the finance and power of the banking institutions and so on to dominate this system. And also within this, there are these kinds of social relations. The social relation is, of course, between wages and capital, which is very important in the production process. But then there are social relations between industrial producers and merchant capitalists, the ones who are going to take care of this. And then there's the financiers who are taking care of this. The rent, the fact that this is taking place on the land is a condition so that people can extract rent from the use of the land. So again, some of this can become unbalanced if, for example, the landlords and the rentiers become so powerful and so significant, then they will just extract pretty much all of the value that's being created in here. And after a while, people will kind of say, well, I'm just going to kind of use be a rentier rather than an industrialist bothering with all of this kind of thing. So you find social imbalances emerging here, as well as economic imbalances. So I'm working with all the time as to looking at situations and using this framework to look very closely. And I think it's very interesting that when we start to think about the social formation, some of the things which are very significant in certain disciplines become much more relevant and much more obvious, as opposed to thinking about the inner structure. The inner structure, for me, defines what political economy is about. It's a tightly organized sort of way of thinking. And as somebody who once commented, it's very temporal in its orientation. You're looking at a system in expansion. You're looking at perpetual growth, accumulation and accumulation and more accumulation. So the economy of the inner structure has a very particular kind of flavor to it, and tends to be dominant in the ways in which political economists think of the world. On the other hand, the world of the social formation is a world in which a great deal of differentiation occurs, cultural differentiation, differentiation of environmental conditions, and all the rest of it. And we tend to find a bunch of disciplines which are very much more concerned with that. So that, for example, geographers, anthropologists, historians as well, tend to be more concerned with what's going on in the social formation. And it's almost like, well, in the background, there is this kind of grumbling thunderstorm of what's going on in the capitalist mode of production going on. But the main focus of those disciplines tends to be about the creation of spatial organization and places and so on, and the differentiations which exist, and so there's very much more of that going on within the social formation, and those disciplines pay much more attention to the social formation than to the mode of production, whereas disciplines like economics, in particular, and political economy, tend to pay much more attention to the mode of production and what's going on in the mode of production. So this relationship again between mode of production and social formation is critical for thinking. You cannot imagine a mode of production that did not exist within a social formation, and you cannot imagine a social formation which is somehow or other outside of the operation of this engine of growth and the engine of value in motion, which is so critical in the political economy of what capital is about. So the general framework in which I'm working then is capitalist mode of production, capitalist social formation, and thinking about the ways in which this process works, how fast is the value moving, what the momentum is about, how the growth is being absorbed, and what the contradictions are within this system, and why crises periodically form within it. That becomes, if you like, my primary focus of inquiry. Thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to David Harvey's Anti-Capitalist Chronicles, a Democracy at Work production.